Autumn in Boston is brief. As the maple leaves began to turn red, Elizabeth Foster stood gazing at the city view from her apartment window. On her finger gleamed a new engagement ring. "I still can't believe it," Elizabeth whispered with a smile. "In 1 week, I'll be Robert's wife." Meeting Robert Clark had been the luckiest deal in her career as a real estate agent. Robert, a famous architect, had been looking for a new office space. Their relationship, which began with that first property viewing, deepened rapidly through shared interests and values. A year later, Robert proposed to Elizabeth on the rooftop of a building he designed, with the sunset as their backdrop. Elizabeth's smartphone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. Her mother's name appeared on the screen. "Mom, what is it?" "Elizabeth, I was confirming the time for your final wedding dress fitting. It's tomorrow at 2 p.m., is that right?" Martha Foster's voice was always practical. "Yes, that's right. Will Caitlin be coming too?" There was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone. "Of course. Your sister needs to try on her bridesmaid dress as well." Elizabeth let out a small sigh. Her sister Caitlin was a popular model in Boston and an influencer with many social media followers. Her beauty and charm attracted attention wherever she went. "I understand. I'll see you tomorrow then," Elizabeth ended the conversation. Her relationship with her sister had always been complicated. From childhood, Caitlin had been the more noticeable one. In school events and family gatherings, she naturally drew the spotlight. Her parents, especially her father George, took pride in Caitlin's radiance. Meanwhile, the serious and reserved Elizabeth immersed herself in studies and work, quietly building her career. In high school, when Elizabeth was elected class representative, Caitlin had become the cheerleading captain and the most popular girl in school. In college, while Elizabeth studied economics, Caitlin began her modeling career and soon appeared on the covers of local magazines. However, Caitlin's recent behavior had been strange. After Elizabeth announced her engagement to Robert, she suddenly became interested in their relationship. She'd accidentally encountered them on dates more frequently and actively sought conversations with Robert. At first, Elizabeth thought her sister was simply happy for her. But sometimes she sensed something hidden behind Caitlin's smile. Was it jealousy? Competitiveness? The doorbell rang, interrupting Elizabeth's thoughts. When she opened it, there stood Robert holding a bouquet of flowers. "What's this?" "It's not even a special day," Elizabeth said in a surprised voice. Robert embraced her as he answered, "I don't need a special reason. I just wanted to give the most beautiful flowers in the world to the most beautiful woman in the world." Elizabeth felt a sense of security in her lover's arms. Robert had brought stability and love to her life. "Your dress fitting is tomorrow, right?" Robert asked as he sat on the sofa. "Is Caitlin coming too?" Elizabeth carefully observed his expression. "Yes, she is." "Is something wrong?" Robert looked a bit uneasy. "No, it's nothing. Just that the messages she's been sending me lately are a bit frequent." "Messages? What kind of messages?" "Nothing significant. Wedding details and such, but the frequency has increased." Elizabeth frowned. "She's been acting strange lately. At our engagement party last week, she was talking to you the whole time." Robert took her hand. "Don't worry. In a week, you'll be my wife. That's all that matters." That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She was thinking about Caitlin's behavior and her relationship with Robert. Her sister had always wanted what Elizabeth had. Starting with toys in childhood, then friends in high school, even college majors. Now, Robert? Elizabeth tried to shake off the thought. It must be paranoia. No matter how competitive Caitlin might be, she wouldn't go after her sister's fiancé. With just 1 week until the wedding, she hoped this anxiety wouldn't spoil the anticipation and joy of her new life ahead. The Cathedral of St. Mary in Boston was bathed in the soft autumn sunlight. Roses and lilacs adorned the aisle, and crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling reflected light, creating a fairy tale atmosphere. Elizabeth and Robert's wedding was proceeding as perfectly as possible. Elizabeth took her father George's arm and walked down the aisle. Her white dress, both classic and contemporary in design, flowed elegantly along the lines of her body. Robert waited at the altar, and his eyes, fixed on her, brimmed with tears of pure love and emotion. After exchanging vows and rings, they officially became husband and wife. As the choir's voices echoed throughout the cathedral, the newlyweds exited with expressions full of happiness. The ballroom of a luxury Boston hotel, which served as the reception venue, was a space that merged Elizabeth's real estate connections with Robert's architectural aesthetic. Cream-colored tablecloths with gold accents and seasonal flowers adorned each table. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now beginning the reception party for Mr. and Mrs. Elizabeth and Robert Clark. As the host's voice echoed, the guests applauded the entrance of the newlyweds. Elizabeth and Robert entered hand in hand, with radiant smiles. Let's begin with a toast. First, the best man and the groom's best friend, David Morrison. David stood up, glass in hand. I've known Robert since our days in the architecture department in college. I still remember how his eyes lit up the first time he talked about Elizabeth. She's special, he said. I think everyone here today can see that those words were true. The speeches continued, filling the venue with laughter and emotion. After the speech from Elizabeth's maid of honor and best friend Jennifer, it was time for messages from the family. Next, the bride's father, George Foster. George stood up, looking a bit nervous. My eldest daughter Elizabeth has always been responsible and caring since she was a child. Our family sincerely celebrates the happiness she has found. Robert, we are honored to welcome you as a member of our family. Martha also gave a short speech, blessing the couple with warm, motherly words. A pleasant atmosphere spread throughout the venue. According to the program, the main course was supposed to be served next. However, suddenly, Caitlin stood up from her table and snatched the microphone from the host. Her emerald green bridesmaid dress created a subtle clash with the venue's decor. Everyone, please listen. Caitlin's voice had its usual confident tone, but her eyes were wider than normal, emitting a strange glow. I have a special congratulatory message for my sister and Robert. Elizabeth felt a sense of foreboding. Her sister's speech wasn't included in the program. Robert took her hand, trying to reassure her, but his fingers were trembling slightly too. Actually, I have some surprising news for everyone. Caitlin continued in an excited voice. I'm pregnant with my sister's husband's child. The venue fell silent for a moment. Yes, with Robert's child. From today, this is my wedding. As Caitlin's words exploded, the venue was filled with murmurs. Guests looked at each other with expressions of disbelief. Elizabeth's best friend Jennifer covered her mouth with her hand, unable to hide her shock. Martha and George stood up, their faces red, and approached Caitlin. George took the microphone from her. Elizabeth, he said in a voice filled with anger and disappointment, we trusted you, and now we're in such an embarrassing situation. Martha also stood beside her husband and took the microphone. That's right. You're no longer part of this family. Just disappear. The reception venue fell into complete chaos. Some guests stood up and headed for the exit, while others sat dumbfounded. The photographers continued to record this unexpected development, and the band members exchanged confused glances. However, all attention was focused on Elizabeth and Robert, who remained seated at their table. They looked at each other, and then, they burst into laughter. Elizabeth's laughter cut through the tension in the room. Robert joined her, and there was a strange sense of unity between them. Caitlin stood frozen with an expression mixing confusion and anger. In her plan, Elizabeth should have broken down in tears, Robert should have been racked with guilt, and the wedding should have been ruined. But the reality was completely different. What's so funny? Caitlin cried in a trembling voice. Your husband had an affair with me. I'm pregnant. But Elizabeth and Robert's laughter didn't stop. They held each other's hands tightly, as if sharing a secret. As the murmuring in the venue grew louder, Elizabeth slowly stood up. Her expression changed from sudden brightness to calmness. She stared at Caitlin and began walking quietly toward the microphone. What was happening? Why could Elizabeth and Robert laugh in such a situation? And was Caitlin's claim true? Elizabeth took the microphone and looked around the entire venue. Her expression no longer showed surprise or agitation. Instead, it reflected quiet conviction and serenity. Everyone, I'm sorry for the disturbance, her voice was surprisingly calm. Especially to those who came from far away, I sincerely apologize for involving you in this unexpected drama. She glanced at Robert for a moment. He also stood up and came to stand beside Elizabeth. Between them, an unspoken bond could be felt. First, I want to make something clear, Elizabeth continued. My sister Caitlin's claim, that she is pregnant with Robert's child is. She paused for a moment and took a deep breath. True. Murmurs arose from the venue again. But Elizabeth quickly raised her hand, asking for silence. To be precise, the fact that Robert and my sister had a relationship is true. This happened 3 months ago. Caitlin began to look triumphant, but her expression froze at Elizabeth's next words. However, her claim that she is pregnant is a lie. Elizabeth continued calmly, actually, we already knew everything. Robert confessed to me the day after their affair. Robert stepped forward and took the microphone. His face showed deep regret. I made the worst mistake. I betrayed Elizabeth and damaged her trust. One night, after drinking heavily due to work stress, when my judgment was impaired, Caitlin came to my apartment. He hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words. She approached under the guise of comfort, and I gave in to weakness. Elizabeth took the microphone again. When Robert confessed, I naturally felt intense anger and sadness. I considered breaking off the engagement. She looked around the venue, searching for her sister. Caitlin stood frozen, her face red. However, we talked, received counseling, and decided to overcome this difficulty. People make mistakes. What's important is how they deal with them afterward. Robert took her hand and looked at her with gratitude. Elizabeth smiled and continued. And as we proceeded with the wedding preparations, I happened to learn the truth. I have regular checkups with Dr. Johnson at Boston Women's Clinic, and after last month's checkup, I overheard a conversation among nurses in the hallway. They were talking about a patient named Caitlin Foster, my sister. Elizabeth's expression hardened. The nurses were discussing how she had taken a pregnancy test, the result was negative, and she had been deeply upset by the result. Caitlin had now begun to retreat toward the corner of the venue. But Elizabeth's voice clearly pursued her. At that point, I could anticipate my sister's plan. She intended to ruin my wedding. Using her mistake with Robert. Elizabeth slowly walked toward Caitlin. You may have wondered why we laughed. It's because we had anticipated this moment. In fact, we even predicted the timing of your performance. Who knows a sister better than I do? The color drained from Caitlin's face. You're lying. I really am pregnant. Elizabeth shrugged. We can take a test right now. Dr. Johnson would be happy to help. Tears welled up in Caitlin's eyes, and she said in a trembling voice, why? Why would you do this? Elizabeth let out a deep sigh. That's what we'd like to know, Caitlin. Martha and George stood there stunned. Their expressions were filled with confusion and shame. Martha spoke first. Elizabeth, we. Elizabeth looked at her parents. You believed Caitlin's words and condemned me. You said, you're no longer family. Without any evidence, without any questions. George bowed his head, at a loss for words. Tears welled up in Martha's eyes. But today is not the time to discuss that, Elizabeth turned back to the guests. Today is my wedding to Robert. We have already weathered the worst storm. And now, we want to celebrate this special day with all of you. Surprisingly, applause broke out in the venue. Starting with a few people, it eventually spread throughout. Many guests seemed impressed by Elizabeth and Robert's honesty and strength. The host regained his composure and took the microphone. Now, please enjoy your dinner as planned. Afterward, we will move on to the newlyweds' first dance. The band began to play a quiet tune, and waiters started serving the main course. On the surface, it seemed to have returned to a normal reception, but tension still lingered in the venue. Caitlin began walking toward the exit. Her parents followed her. Elizabeth watched them leave, taking Robert's arm. Are you okay? Robert asked in a low voice. Elizabeth nodded slightly. Yes. We did the right thing. As they returned to their seats, Jennifer approached. I can't believe it, Elizabeth. You're so strong. Elizabeth smiled at her best friend. I had no choice. Either reveal the truth or live with a lie. The reception continued, and many guests approached Elizabeth and Robert, expressing their support and admiration. Their honesty and courage in facing difficulties had become the true stars of the day. However, in Elizabeth's heart, complex emotions toward her sister and parents were swirling. The rift with her family would not be easily repaired. Tonight, while celebrating the beginning of a new family, she also felt the end of her relationship with the family she was born into. Still, she squeezed Robert's hand tightly. In the hotel's luxurious lobby, Caitlin was crying, her shoulders shaking. Her emerald green dress looked out of place on the marble floor. Martha and George stood a little distance away, arguing fiercely in low voices. I can't believe that child lied, Martha whispered to her husband. Of course we're embarrassed, but we hurt Elizabeth. George shook his head painfully. We've always believed Caitlin's words. We've always favored Caitlin over Elizabeth. He swallowed his words. At that moment, the door to the reception venue opened, and Elizabeth came out alone. Her wedding dress quietly gleamed under the hallway lights. She barely glanced at her parents and walked directly toward Caitlin. Why? Elizabeth's voice was gentle, but beneath it lay years of wounds. Why did you try so hard to destroy my happiness? Caitlin looked up. Her makeup was running, her eyes were red and swollen, but her expression still harbored defiance. You've always had everything. Everything? Elizabeth sighed. What did I have? Recognition, Caitlin's voice suddenly grew stronger. Top grades in school, success in your career, and now a perfect husband. Elizabeth was silent for a moment, her eyes looking into the distance as if reflecting on the past. It was 5 years ago, right after Caitlin experienced her first major setback in her modeling career. The sisters were meeting at a Boston cafe. I'm not good enough anymore, Caitlin said, crying. New young models keep coming up. I can't call myself young anymore. Elizabeth took her sister's hand. You have talent. There must be many possibilities besides modeling. Talent. Caitlin gave a bitter smile. All I have is my appearance. Unlike you. You're smart, have a career, and are recognized by mom and dad. Elizabeth looked at her sister in surprise. Our parents recognize me? You must be joking. Dad calls my real estate work a girl's pastime. Mom keeps asking when I'll find a proper man. Neither of them has ever praised my achievements. Caitlin revealed her disbelief. That's a lie. They always brag about your success. Elizabeth is responsible, Elizabeth is smart, be more like Elizabeth. The two left the cafe without realizing each other's truth. We lived in the same house, but we might as well have been in different worlds, Elizabeth said quietly, returning to the present. Martha approached the two. We loved both of you. But... she faltered. But you raised Caitlin as the special child, and me as the responsible child, Elizabeth looked at her mother. And we continued to play those roles. Caitlin stood up. Her voice was trembling. I just wanted to take something from you, just once. I wanted to see you lose something. You're always perfect, always right, always strong. Me, perfect. Elizabeth couldn't help but laugh. I was always anxious. Especially in front of you. You draw all eyes just by entering a room. I was like a shadow. That's a lie. Caitlin shouted. You always attracted everyone's attention. George stood between them. Deep regret showed on his face. It's our responsibility, he said quietly. We compared you to and made you compete. The elder sister is responsible, and the younger sister is charming. And both of you became trapped in those roles. Elizabeth stared at her father. Years of hurt showed in her eyes, but also a light of understanding. Robert. Caitlin suddenly said in a weak voice. He truly loves you. What happened with him? I arranged it. I got him drunk. She faltered. Elizabeth frowned. I know. Robert told me everything. He initially rejected your advances, but you told him Elizabeth works too much and ignores me to evoke his sympathy. Then you poured him lots of whiskey. Caitlin covered her face. I'm really the worst. Yes, you're the worst, Elizabeth said mercilessly. But you're my sister. A long silence followed. Eventually, music could be heard from the reception venue. It was time for the first dance. I have to go, Elizabeth said. As she was about to turn back, Caitlin grabbed her hand. I'm really not pregnant, Caitlin admitted in a trembling voice. As you said, the test was negative. I know, Elizabeth said quietly. You wanted to ruin my wedding. You wanted to take Robert from me. Forgive me, tears flowed from Caitlin's eyes. Please. Elizabeth took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. Forgiving and forgetting are different. I intend to forgive you. But it will take time to regain trust. Martha approached. We also. Elizabeth, we believed Caitlin's words instead of yours. I don't want to talk about it now, Elizabeth interrupted her mother. Today is my wedding. We'll consider what to do as a family tomorrow and beyond. She released Caitlin's hand and turned her back on her parents, about to return to the venue. As she put her hand on the door, she turned back and said quietly. Also, I have no intention of disappearing. From now on, you must choose whether to acknowledge my existence or end our relationship. When Elizabeth returned to the venue, Robert was waiting for her with a worried look. Are you okay? Yes, she smiled. I feel much better than I expected. Robert took her hand and led her to the dance floor. The band began to play a quiet tune, and the spotlight illuminated the two. I'll spend a lifetime making amends, Robert whispered in her ear. For that night. Elizabeth looked into his eyes. You've already made amends. You told the truth and took responsibility. That's everything to me. They began to dance slowly. Elizabeth rested her head on Robert's shoulder and looked around the venue. The guests watched the couple with warm eyes. Her best friend Jennifer was smiling while wiping away tears. As the music played, a quiet conviction grew in Elizabeth's heart. Her marriage to Robert began after weathering the worst storm. It wouldn't be a weak bond, but rather a strong one. After all, they had already overcome trials that many couples never experience in a lifetime. And perhaps, someday, her relationship with her family would heal. It would take time, but today's events might mark the beginning of the end of years of misunderstanding and competition. Elizabeth smiled in Robert's arms. Our wedding has certainly become unforgettable. Robert looked at her tenderly. It's perfect just having you here. A year passed, and the Clark family had a new addition. Emma had taught Elizabeth and Robert a new meaning of the word happiness. The front door opened, and Robert came in carrying a large paper bag. I picked up the birthday cake as ordered. Tomorrow was Emma's first birthday. They were planning a small party. Who's coming? Elizabeth asked, kissing Robert. Jennifer and her husband, my parents, and... He hesitated a little. Your parents said they're coming too, right? Elizabeth nodded slightly. Over the past year, she had gradually repaired her relationship with her parents. It started with formal phone calls, then short visits, and with the birth of their granddaughter, the relationship slowly regained warmth. And Caitlin too, Elizabeth quietly added. Robert showed a surprised expression. Really? Elizabeth hugged Emma and looked out the window. She told me last week that it's been 6 months since she started therapy. It's not easy to face yourself, but she's trying. Several months after the wedding incident, Caitlin temporarily suspended her modeling career and began psychological counseling. Behind her competitiveness and need for approval were hidden anxieties and questions about self-worth dating back to childhood. This will be her first time meeting Emma, right? Robert asked as he put the cake in the refrigerator. Yes, Elizabeth answered, looking a bit nervous. But I hope this will be a new beginning. The bell rang, and Elizabeth was surprised as she headed for the door. When she opened it, Caitlin was standing there. Her hair was cut short, her makeup was modest, and she no longer had the flashiness of before. Am I too early? Caitlin said anxiously. You said tomorrow, but I wanted to see you a little. She had a small package in her arms. Elizabeth hesitated for a moment, then opened the door wide and invited her sister in. Your timing is perfect. Emma is about to have dinner, would you like to join us? Tears welled up in Caitlin's eyes. Thank you. As she entered the living room, Emma looked at the new visitor with curious eyes. Caitlin timidly approached and offered the small package. A present for Emma. May I open it? Elizabeth nodded, and they opened the package together. Inside was a handmade small stuffed animal, a teddy bear with Emma's name embroidered on it. Did you make this yourself? Elizabeth asked in surprise. Caitlin nodded. It's my new hobby. Turns out I have a knack for it. Emma reached for the stuffed animal and smiled happily. At that moment, the atmosphere in the room softened. It would still take time to fully restore forgiveness and trust. But this small step was evidence of a new beginning. The story of a wounded family had begun to walk the path of healing.